Not the faint, cozy kind of smoke that drifts from a fireplace in winter, nor the acrid scent of someone's overcooked dinner. This was sharp, chemical, insistent, the kind of odor that prickled the inside of your nose and clung to your throat. I woke up to it clinging to the curtains in my bedroom, heavy in the air, like the warning growl of an animal I couldn't yet see. At first, I thought it was a dream. I blinked in the dark, the room still, my chest rising and falling too quickly. The house was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. My mind rushed through possibilities. Maybe someone was burning leaves down the street, maybe the wind carried it. But the smell was stronger than that, too thick, too immediate. I sat up, the mattress creaking. That was when I saw the flicker. Out the window, a pale orange light pulsed against the blinds. It wasn't steady like a street lamp, nor artificial like headlights. It danced. It leapt. My stomach dropped. My hand shot out, pulling the blinds open. Flames. They licked up the side of my porch like hungry tongues, curling around the wood posts I had painted myself last summer. The glow of fire splashed across my lawn, casting monstrous shadows of the maple tree. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My house, my safe place, my little fortress, was under attack. Adrenaline surged, snapping me into motion. I grabbed my phone and bolted down the hall, shouting my daughter's name. She was already stumbling out of her room, bleary-eyed, clutching the stuffed rabbit she still slept with even at 9 years old. Outside, now, I barked, louder than I meant to. My voice cracked like it was someone else's. She froze, confused, but then she saw the glow down the hallway windows. She understood. We ran. The smoke had already seeped inside, gray tendrils crawling along the ceiling. I pulled her shirt over her mouth and pushed her ahead of me. The heat intensified, an invisible wall pressing against my skin. Every second felt like a stolen one. We made it out the back door into the cool night air, stumbling into the yard. I turned just in time to see the porch roof collapse, flames roaring higher. Sparks scattered like angry fireflies into the sky. The crackling wood was a living thing, snarling and devouring everything I had built. My phone shook in my hand as I dialed 911. My voice sounded foreign, shrill, when I gave the dispatcher my address. Fire! My house is on fire, please, hurry. Neighbors began to spill out of their houses, pajama-clad and wide-eyed. Some stood in stunned silence. Others pulled out their phones. A few ran to help, though there was nothing to do except watch the inferno consume the place I called home. The fire trucks arrived in a storm of red lights and sirens, but even then, I knew it was too late. Water blasted through the hoses, hissing as it met the blaze, but the flames were too greedy. They had already swallowed the living room, the kitchen, the walls where my daughter's school drawings were taped in uneven lines. I stood barefoot on the grass, holding my child against me as she sobbed into my chest. My own tears refused to come. I was too hollow, too stunned. Every crack and crash of falling wood felt like a hammer driving home the same truth. I was losing everything. But amid the chaos, another sound cut through. Whispers. I caught snippets from the cluster of neighbors huddled across the street. Words carried easily in the night air. Saw her, walking down the street earlier. Said she was fed up with him. Always complaining about the trash cans. Her name surfaced, low at first, then louder, Karen. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our homeowners association. A woman who wielded bylaws like weapons, who once fined me $200 because my grass had grown half an inch too long after a week of rain. She had a way of speaking that wasn't loud, but sharp, as if her voice was always meant to cut. She patrolled the neighborhood like a warden, always finding something to scold, some imaginary crime against her precious community standards. And she hated me, not in the passive-aggressive way she hated most others. No, she saved something special for me. Maybe because I didn't bow to her. Maybe because I had once challenged her at an HOA meeting, pointing out that her constant fines bordered on harassment. The way she had looked at me that night still haunted me. Eyes narrowed, lips pursed, her manicured nails drumming the table. "People like you don't belong here," she had said. Those words came rushing back now, standing barefoot in the grass as my home collapsed. The fire marshal moved quickly, barking orders, pointing flashlights. I overheard his clipped report. Accelerant. Gasoline. Evidence of tampering. This wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted this. And the whispers grew louder. A neighbor swore she saw Karen walking down the street not an hour before, clutching something, red, plastic, shaped like a gas can. Another mentioned how she had muttered just days ago that maybe the neighborhood would finally look decent if certain houses weren't here. I clutched my daughter tighter. My jaw ached from how hard I clenched it. The fire had stolen everything I owned: my grandmother's quilt, my law school diploma, the little wooden owl my daughter had made in art class. But the whispers gave me something back: a name, a face, a motive. Karen. Even as the fire was still burning, as firefighters moved like shadows through the smoke, I knew deep in my bones, she had done this. The HOA president who fined me for leaving my trash can out an extra 3 hours had escalated to arson. And she thought she could get away with it. I watched the flames claw their way into the sky, my heart pounding with a strange mix of grief and fury. My home was gone, but I wasn't. And if Karen thought she had won, she hadn't seen the last of me. By morning, the blackened skeleton of my house was cordoned off with yellow tape, fluttering in the early breeze like a cruel kind of celebration. The fire trucks were gone, leaving behind wet, charred timbers that steamed in the rising sun. The smell of smoke lingered heavy, woven into the very air. It clung to my skin, my clothes, even the inside of my mouth. I stood outside the perimeter, my daughter with relatives for the day, as investigators combed through what used to be our living room. Their boots crunched on brittle remains, their gloved hands collecting fragments of evidence. One of them, the fire marshal, a grizzled man with deep creases carved into his forehead, approached me with the kind of steady calm people in his profession must cultivate. His name was Dawson. "We've ruled out electrical," he said without preamble. "Gas lines are intact. No sign of an appliance failure. The fire started on your porch." "That's unusual." "Unusual how?" I asked, though my gut already knew. He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth to hand over. "There are traces of accelerant. Gasoline. Someone poured it along the porch and lit it." The words should have shocked me, but instead they landed like confirmation. My stomach twisted, not in surprise, but in recognition. "Arson," I whispered. He nodded. "Yes. Deliberate." The edges of my vision darkened for a second. I thought of the flames clawing up the posts, the roar as the porch collapsed, the stuffed rabbit my daughter had left on her bed. I steadied myself with a breath. "Do you have anyone who might want to hurt you?" Dawson asked carefully, pulling a notebook from his jacket. And there it was, the question I knew would come, the one I had dreaded and anticipated all at once. Images of Karen flooded my mind. Her pursed lips, her pointed fingers, the smug tilt of her chin when she handed me violation notices. The way she once shouted at me for parking my car 2 inches over the painted line in the shared lot. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But then I remembered the whispers from last night, neighbors murmuring her name as my home burned to the ground. "There is someone," I admitted slowly. "Karen. She's the HOA president. She doesn't like me. She's been threatening me, in her own way." Dawson's brow lifted. "Threatening." I explained about the fines, the harassment, her constant comments that I didn't belong in her neighborhood. I told him about the argument at the last HOA meeting. Her words still burned in my ears. "Maybe your kind of people should live somewhere else." Dawson scribbled quickly. "We'll talk to her. And your neighbors. By afternoon, the police were canvassing the street. One officer knocked on doors, another took statements. I lingered close enough to hear snippets, my heart hammering each time Karen's name slipped into the conversation. Mrs. Alvarez, who lived 2 doors down, spoke in hushed tones. "I saw her, officer. Around 11 last night. She was walking down the sidewalk with something in her hand. Looked like a gas can, the red plastic kind. I thought it was odd, but, well, she's always doing odd things." The officer's pen scratched across his pad. Next was Mr. Collins, a retiree who spent most evenings on his porch. She said to me on Thursday, "One way or another, we'll clean up this street." I thought she was talking about the leaves or the trash bins. But, now I wonder. Even more damning came from the Thompsons across the street. She bragged about it, Mrs. Thompson said, voice trembling. The morning before the fire, she was at the community pool. I heard her tell another woman, "Maybe I'll finally solve the eyesore problem once and for all." She laughed, like it was a joke. But no one laughed with her. Each testimony was a nail in the coffin. I felt vindicated, but also sick. Because as their words stacked up, I realized the depth of her malice. Karen hadn't just hated me in passing, she had planned this, obsessed over it, and carried it out. The police went to her house that evening. I wasn't allowed near, but I watched from the curb, pretending to scroll through my phone. Their knocks echoed across the quiet neighborhood. After a few tense minutes, Karen emerged. She wore her robe, hair perfectly set even at the end of the day, as though she'd been expecting them. Her expression was the same as always, tight-lipped, superior, with a hint of boredom, as if law enforcement were just another committee beneath her. I couldn't hear her words, but I saw her gestures, sharp, dismissive waves of her hands. She shook her head firmly, then crossed her arms, a queen defending her castle. The officers didn't arrest her that night, but they didn't leave empty-handed either. They carried out a red plastic gas can, its cap crusted with residue. My pulse thundered in my ears. Over the next 2 days, the investigation moved fast. Receipts surfaced from the gas station half a mile away. The timestamp was hours before the fire, the purchase, 2 gallons of gasoline. Paid with Karen's credit card. Security footage sealed it further. There she was, in all her arrogant glory, standing at the pump in her spotless white tennis outfit, her blonde bob tucked neatly behind her ears. She filled the can, tapped her card, and drove off in her Lexus, as casual as if she were buying milk. When the detective showed me still images from the footage, I felt both fury and a strange kind of awe. The audacity of her. She hadn't even tried to hide. On the 3rd day, the knock came at my door. Well, not my door anymore, but the temporary apartment my cousin had let me and my daughter stay in. A detective stood there with a grim but satisfied look. "We've arrested her," he said simply. The words washed over me like cold water. For the first time since the fire, I felt my shoulders unclench, just slightly. But even as relief sparked, something darker smoldered beneath it. Because Karen wasn't just my neighbor. She wasn't just a petty tyrant with a clipboard and a gavel. She was a criminal, an arsonist, and she was about to discover that the man she tried to burn out of her neighborhood was also the one who would face her across the courtroom, with the law itself at his back. The investigation had given me proof. Soon, I'd have justice. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, the way all courthouses do. To me, it was the scent of order, of justice, of rules that couldn't be bent to suit the whims of neighborhood tyrants. I'd walked through those doors countless times before. Usually, I carried case files under my arm, briefed witnesses in the hallway, or chatted with other attorneys about jury selection. It was routine. But that morning, it wasn't routine. That morning, as I tightened my tie in the bathroom mirror and smoothed down the wrinkles in my black suit, I wasn't just a prosecutor. I was a victim, and my house was still ash. When I entered the courtroom, the jurors weren't there yet. The bailiff nodded at me, his usual casual salute. The judge's bench loomed in polished oak, an immovable throne of authority. The gallery behind me buzzed softly with neighbors who had come to watch, people who had stood in the street that night, whispering Karen's name as the flames climbed higher. They were here for the spectacle, yes, but also for vindication. I set my files neatly on the prosecutor's table. Each page had been carefully arranged. Photographs of the charred remains, receipts from the gas station, still images from the surveillance camera, statements from neighbors. A story told not just in words but in facts, each piece of brick in the wall closing in on her. Then the door opened. The bailiff called out, "Defendant entering." Chains clinked softly as Karen shuffled inside. She wore the beige jumpsuit issued by the county jail, her hair a mess for the first time in all the years I'd known her. No pearls, no pressed slacks, no designer shoes. Just canvas and cuffs. The moment her eyes met mine, the world slowed. Her expression, oh, I will never forget it. First, confusion. Her gaze darted to the prosecutor's table, expecting some stranger in a suit, some faceless cog of the legal system. Instead, she found me. Then her mouth opened just slightly, disbelief creasing her perfect features. Finally, rage. You, she hissed, though the bailiff barked for silence. I didn't flinch. I lifted my chin, my face calm, professional. Inside, though, a storm raged. Every memory of her smug wall letters, every insult, every fine stacked for absurd reasons, all of it collided with the image of my house collapsing in flames. And now, here she was, powerless. The judge entered, robes flowing, and we all rose. Formalities echoed, the case number, the charges read aloud. Arson, property destruction, reckless endangerment. The words sounded clinical, almost sterile, but I knew their weight. They meant that what Karen had done wasn't just personal cruelty. It was criminal. The trial began. Jury selection was swift, the evidence was too strong for delay. I opened with measured confidence, standing tall, projecting my voice across the room. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about more than a house fire. It's about arrogance. It's about a neighbor who believed she was above the law, who thought she could enforce her will through fear and destruction. The evidence will show that the defendant, Karen Whitfield, deliberately and maliciously set fire to my home, endangering not only myself but also my young daughter asleep inside that night. By the end of this trial, there will be no doubt in your minds, she is guilty. I didn't once let my gaze leave the jurors, but I felt Karen's glare burning into me. I could almost hear her thoughts. How dare he? How dare he be the one to stand here, judging me? Her defense attorney, a slick man in an ill-fitting suit who clearly hadn't expected such a high-profile case, rose for his opening. He painted Karen as a misunderstood woman, a dedicated community leader unfairly maligned by gossip. He argued that the fire was tragic but coincidental, that the so-called evidence was circumstantial. But his words rang hollow. I could see it in the jury's faces. They weren't buying it. The evidence phase began, and with it, the story unfolded piece by piece. First, the fire marshal, Dawson, testified. He spoke with calm authority, explaining the chemical traces found, the gasoline residue, the clear signs of accelerant. He showed photos of the burn patterns, the undeniable marks of deliberate ignition. Next came the neighbors. Mrs. Alvarez described seeing Karen on the street with the gas can. Mr. Collins recalled her ominous remark about cleaning up the street. Mrs. Thompson delivered the most damning testimony, recounting how Karen had practically bragged about solving the eyesore problem. Each witness added another stone to the wall around her. Karen squirmed, her composure slipping. Her jaw tightened, her fists clenched on the defense table. She shook her head subtly, mouthing silent denials. Then came the receipts. I handed them to the clerk, who displayed them for the jury. Time stamped. Karen's name. Gasoline. Hours before the fire. Finally, the security footage. The grainy video played on the courtroom monitor. Karen at the pump, filling the red plastic can, swiping her credit card. The jury leaned forward as if gravity itself pulled them closer. This is the defendant, I said simply, pointing at the screen. Buying the very fuel used to destroy my home. The silence afterward was heavy, unbreakable. Karen took the stand in her own defense. Her lawyer must have thought her charisma could sway the jury, that her polished presence could override hard facts. But Karen without control wasn't Karen at all. She tried to charm, to laugh off the witnesses' accounts. She claimed she had bought gasoline for her lawn mower, though no mower was ever found at her house. She said the neighbors misunderstood her jokes, that she was simply venting. But the cracks showed. Under cross-examination, I pressed her. Mrs. Whitfield, you fined me $200 for leaving a trash can out. Correct. Yes, but that was in accordance with law. You find me again when my daughter left chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Correct. Her face reddened. It was unsightly. And the night before the fire, you told another neighbor you would solve the eyesore problem once and for all. Correct. That was a joke, she snapped, losing her polished veneer. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice so the jury had to strain to hear. Was burning down my house your idea of a joke? She froze. The silence that followed was louder than any answer she could give. Dash dash dash. By the time closing arguments came, the case was sealed. I didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke for itself. Justice isn't about personal grudges, I told the jury, my voice steady. It's about accountability. The defendant thought she was above the law. Tonight, my daughter and I could have died because of that arrogance. You hold the power to tell her, and everyone like her, that no one is above the law. Not in this courtroom. Not in this country. I sat down, my hands steady, though inside I burned with the memory of smoke and fire. When the jury filed out to deliberate, Karen finally turned to me. Her eyes blazed, her voice a low hiss that barely carried across the table. You'll regret this, she spat. I met her glare, unblinking. I already regret trusting the system would keep me safe from you. But I don't regret this. Dash dash dash. The jury didn't take long. Less than 3 hours later, they filed back in. The foreman stood, slip of paper in hand. On the charge of arson, he read, we find the defendant guilty. Karen sagged, the fight draining out of her in an instant. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. I exhaled slowly. Justice had spoken. But even then, as the gavel fell, I knew this wasn't just about a verdict. It was about reclaiming power. About proving to myself, to my daughter, and to everyone who had ever lived under the thumb of people like her that the law still mattered. Karen had tried to burn me out of my home. But here, in my courtroom, it was her world that went up in flames. It reverberated through the courtroom, rolling over the polished wood, echoing against the high ceilings. For a long moment, no one moved. The gavel struck once, sharp as a lightning crack, sealing the verdict into history. Karen's face crumpled, not with tears, but with disbelief. Her lips trembled as if forming protests her tongue no longer dared to give voice to. The perfect mask she'd worn for years, the one she used to lecture neighbors about lawn heights, to scold children for riding bikes without reflectors, to fine me for leaving a trash can visible, shattered right there in front of the jury. I watched her shrink into herself, shoulders slumping, eyes darting around for rescue. But there was no lifeline, no committee, no bylaws to twist in her favor. The law she had ignored was now the law that bound her. The judge's voice was steady, unwavering. The defendant will be remanded to the county correctional facility until sentencing. Court is adjourned. Another strike of the gavel, and it was over. Dash dash dash. The bailiff approached Karen, handcuffs gleaming in the fluorescent light. She resisted at first, jerking her arms back, but the chains clinked again as they closed around her wrists. A sound that, to me, was sweeter than any symphony. You can't do this to me, she snapped, her voice shrill now, stripped of all pretense. I was protecting the neighborhood. I was preserving property values. This isn't justice, it's revenge. Her lawyer tugged her sleeve, whispering for silence, but Karen yanked free. Her glare landed on me, venomous, desperate. This isn't over, she spat. I rose slowly from the prosecutor's table, gathering my files into a neat stack. My voice was calm, deliberate, the same voice I had used 100 times in court. No, Mrs. Whitfield, it is over. For once, the rules apply to you too. The gallery behind us murmured, some shaking their heads, others exchanging knowing looks. Neighbors who had endured her reign of fines and threats. People who had once cowered under her gaze now watching her shuffle out in shackles. For them, too, this was justice. Dash dash dash. Outside the courthouse, the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue. The air smelled clean, nothing like the acrid smoke that had haunted me for weeks. I stood on the wide marble steps, files tucked under my arm, as reporters swarmed the exit. Microphones jutted forward, cameras clicked, voices overlapped. How does it feel, prosecuting your own arson case. Do you think the sentence will bring closure? Was there a conflict of interest? I answered only what I had to. Professional, concise. The jury made their decision based on evidence, not emotions. Justice was served. But deep inside, behind the armor of my practiced lines, another voice whispered, "It feels like breathing again." That night, I went back to the ruins of my house. The fire marshal had released the site days earlier, but I hadn't been able to bring myself to visit. Not until the verdict was final. The lot was quiet. Moonlight washed over the charred skeleton of beams, the broken bricks, the blackened grass. I stood in what used to be my living room, the crunch of debris under my shoes. In the silence, memories pressed down. My daughter's laughter as she built blanket forts here, the scent of coffee on Saturday mornings, the worn couch where I'd fallen asleep grading case files. I knelt and sifted through the ashes, my fingers brushing over something hard and unyielding. I pulled it free. It was the little carved owl my daughter had made in art class, half scorched, its features melted, but still recognizable. My throat tightened. I brushed it gently, soot falling away like snowflakes. Not everything had been destroyed. Some things endure, even through fire. In the weeks that followed, sentencing came. The judge handed Karen 10 years, citing not only the arson but the reckless endangerment of a child's life. She shouted as they dragged her away, her voice echoing down the hallway of the courthouse. "This community will regret this. You'll regret this." But no one regretted it. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. Lawns grew without fear of fines. Children left bikes on driveways. Neighbors gathered on porches, speaking freely without the threat of violation letters. It was as if Karen's conviction had burned away more than my house, it had burned away her grip on everyone else. As for me, I started rebuilding. The insurance process was long, grueling, but when the first bricks of the new foundation went up, I felt something shift. Each nail hammered was an act of defiance. Each wall raised was a promise that Karen hadn't won. My daughter helped choose paint colors. She wanted bright yellow for her new room, like the sun. I let her have it. After everything, she deserved sunlight. One evening, as we stood in the yard watching the construction crew, she tugged my sleeve. "Daddy." "Yes. Will this house be stronger?" I looked at the rising frame, at the fresh wood catching the glow of the setting sun. "Yes," I said softly. "Stronger. Brighter. And no one will ever take it from us again." She smiled, clutching the half-burnt owl in her hands like a talisman. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear phantom crackles, smell smoke that isn't there. Trauma has a way of leaving embers that never quite go out. But I remind myself of the verdict, the gavel, the word guilty ringing in that courtroom. Justice isn't about erasing the fire, it's about proving that even after the worst flames, life can be rebuilt. Karen burned my house to the ground. She tried to erase me, to push me out of a neighborhood she thought she owned. But the next week, when she walked into my courtroom, the tables turned. She was the one reduced to rubble. She was the one consumed by fire, not of flames, but of justice. And I rose from the ashes.